Right, so let's carry on, shall we?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I've got a series of questions, and I think I know from our first chat that you're not going to pull any punches if you don't need to. So, my big one, and the reason I started doing this series of videos on the refereeing in England, is my concern over the standards of refereeing
Mm.
that is going in, week out. And I've been watching games since the 70s. And
Yeah,
I watched you refereeing, right?
yeah,
And what I've seen, and I would say specifically since Mike Riley came on board, that
yeah.
a gradual deterioration in the standards. Now, when I've done these videos, the responses to them has been overwhelming. And it's been
Mm.
overwhelming by fans of all sorts of clubs. Over 99% of the responses I got were like, yeah, you're right. I'm with you on this. Something is wrong, whether it's a lack of training, whether it's bias, and lots of people are saying it, whether there's corruption going on. Yeah, some of the things I see, I can't understand how they come to those decisions. So, what's your thoughts on it?
Well, first of all, when I retired from the PGMOL, I took up a role as the uh, Premier League referee ambassador. And I think we're aware of the funding of the PGMOL because there's three funding partners, and that's the Premier League, the Football League, and the Football Association. Not a third. But the whole aspect is that it is a business, it's a separate business, standalone, and the board of directors are made up of the CEOs of those three organizations with an independent chairman. And that's how it was when I took over from Philip Don. I reported as general manager. The finance side was being looked after by the finance director of the Premier League, and the secretariat was a great guy called Graham Noakes, who was employed by the FA. That's how we run. We had 24 referees, and our turnover when I left was 5 million.
Yeah,
And in that period of time, when I had a philosophy that just like a manager selecting a team, you pick your best referees, you pick your best players on the day,
yeah,
those that are in form. When I left, we had easily a cadre of 10 out of the 20 odd refs that were world class. And no matter whether we still like or dislike those names, the likes of Paul Durkin, Graham Paul, Mark Halsey, these were names that were reliable. They had controversy, don't get me wrong, but they were reliable. But they also knew that if they didn't perform well, they wouldn't get a game the following week. It's as simple as that.
yeah.
The duty of the boss of the PGMOL is to ensure that the standard of levels are on the upward trend, not on the downward trend. When I decided to retire, I'd reached the age of 65. I thought that Peter Walton was the guy that was going to take over. The reason behind that was he was fairly neutral as an individual. He wasn't the greatest of referees, but he had a high business position with Eon. And therefore, from employment law, from all PR situations, he seemed to be the right guy. I was actually on holiday in up in the north, John O'Groats, believe it or not, when I got a phone call to say we've made a choice. It's Mike Riley. I pulled the car over and I said at the time, "Look, it's your decision. You made a huge mistake." Now I knew Riley because I coached him. I knew that his personality was like a piece of cardboard. It was, it wasn't there. So the first thing, so I had a period of about a year to move out and let him come in. his enthusiasm around that 1 year period was zero.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I don't think this guy wants this job. Anyhow, the outcome was that when he did take over, I got a phone call from a colleague, a referee, who said, Keith, I'm just giving you a nod. But Mike Riley amazingly has said to all of us that we're not to make contact or discuss anything with you.
Wow.
So in a sense, I'm thinking, I'm not too fussed about that. I'm not too worried about it. I've got a job to do for the Premier League. I'm going to be traveling the world, running workshops. However he wants to run the business was fine.
Yeah, but Keith, but that the underlying message in that, whether or not it bothered you or not, the underlying message is not good, is it?
No, because I think that we then saw, if you like, we started to see the decline. And one of the things I'll tell you as a background was one particular Monday at the opening of the season, Mark Elsie had refereed on the opening day, Everton. And on my desk were two emails from both managers praising his performance. So I walked into my office in Longford. I was always on the train, 7:20 in the morning, so I was in the office around 9. I walked into my office in London, and I said to my PA, just make a note that the next Saturday, the first guy on the list is Mark Elsie because he was terrific on Saturday. I've seen the match, I'd analysed it. And she burst into tears. And she said, I have to tell you, he's in hospital. And I've gone, pardon? Well, we kept it away from you because we know that if you knew that he had cancer, he wouldn't have refereed that game on Saturday.
Wow.
And I've gone, yeah, you're probably right, but then I would have spoken to him. So here was a guy that had an operation. And the reason I'm telling you this story is it gives a feel and a picture of the guy who's taken over from me. So I'm constantly in touch with Mark and his wife. How's things? I know he's in Christie's. I know he's had a serious operation. I know that I'm informed that it's worse than what it is. It was that initially the diagnosis was worse. More surgery was needed. I then visited him, and here was a fit guy who looked terrible. Some weeks later, and I'm keeping in touch, it was nobody from the management of the PGMOL had been in touch with Mark. I now left that position.
Yeah.
So then I get a phone call from Mark, and he said, "Would you do me a favour? I'm scheduled to give a talk at Lancashire Cricket Club because he loves cricket." And I've gone, "Absolutely, Mark. I'll fill in." So I made his excuses. I stood up. I did my presentation, and at the back of the room, in walked Mark. He'd had his chemo. He looked dreadful,
Yeah.
but he didn't want to let people down. And
Brilliant.
this was the guy. So I thought then that was the end of Mark's career to some degree when I looked at him, being realistic. And I've already sort of thought he's going to make a great referee coach because he's got that personality. He doesn't pull any punches. He's not the easiest guy to get on with because he tells you it as it is. And sometimes you don't want to hear what he's saying.
Yeah, but us Northerners like that though, don't we?
And yeah, and if he wasn't on a game, if I hadn't appointed him to a game, he was the first in my office wanting to know why. Have I let you down? And the answer was no, I'm giving you a rest. Anyhow, Mark battled through until I got another phone call. And you have to recognize at this time, his wife has been diagnosed with leukemia.
Oh my gosh.
And he's got a young daughter, Lucy. So I got this phone call and I couldn't believe it. He said, Keith, can you do me a favour? I know you're no longer PGMOL. I'm refereeing at Leicester reserves. I go, what? I've got a game at Leicester. You're refereeing? Yeah, I'm refereeing. So I travelled to Leicester and watched him officiate. Again, no one from the PGMOL was there. So we advanced that scenario until I get a call from Mark saying, look, will you come to Wolves? I'm refereeing at Wolverhampton Wanderers. I said, look, I don't want a ticket anywhere near the boardroom or the board. I just get me a ticket and I'll sit in the stands. I'll pay for it if need be. So I'm sat in the middle of Wolverhampton fans. And Mark Halsey walked out into the stadium. There was a short announcement saying this was his first game back, and he received a standing ovation.
Yeah.
Sometime afterwards, he probably wasn't getting the support. I could never get to the bottom why Howard Webb resigned early and Mark Clattenburg resigned early. The outcome was that Mark rang me to say he'd be really honoured if I would attend his last game in the Premier League. And it was at Manchester City. We were sat off the director's box. The guy who ran Manchester City was a guy called Bernard Halford. He'd been with the club forever. I'm sat there enjoying the game. I'm sat next to the professor that had done the operation. And he was saying to me how remarkable Mark was. He couldn't believe how his fitness got him through the chemo and the size of the task that the professor had faced. So he had great pride. Just before half time, I got Bernard Halford heading towards me, and Bernard said, "I've got a note from the PGMOL. You know that tradition is that if a referee is doing his last game at whatever ground he's at, he receives a memento from the club that represents the 20 clubs in the Premier League and the Football League. So it's usually a piece of glass.
Yeah.
It's a glassware. I mean, I decided my last game was going to be Man United Liverpool. I saw it about 4 weeks in advance, and I'd made up here, I'm finishing on that match, which I did. I didn't make any pre-announcement, but I still finished up with a signed football.
Right.
Now, and the kids played in the garden with it forever. So that was that memento gone. But Bernard said to me, "We've been instructed not to make any form of award or presentation to Mark Halsey." That's how disruptive the PGMOL were, because Mark had written a book with another journo who was also suffering cancer at the time, and was morally obliged to ensure that that book went through to presentation, with publication, which he did. And so I said to Bernard, "You make the presentation, Bernard." He said, "Well, I was going to do, but I'm just making you aware of the approach." And as a consequence, Mark left the Premier League, the PGMOL, and normally what happens is there's a general rule of thumb that if you leave, we would give them 1 year's salary, which was round about 45k at that particular time. So they would get that to allow them to go and help them with any employment. That he got nothing. So I just tell you that story because I think it says everything about Mike Riley in terms of his approach to refereeing. Because what you want in a referee is you want a base of outstanding fitness. You know, a referee in a Premier League game, average, is 11,500 meters.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's covering distance. But the important thing is, in my era, it was about endurance, and it now was about explosive sprinting and movement on the field of play because of the dynamics and skill sets of the players. So as a consequence, the old training regime that I had in place through Professor Matt Weston changed, and it became more dynamic. We had to spend more time sprinting. We brought in a running coach, changed the body shape from being vertical as a referee to being an athlete, an hour of sprints went from 25 average to 50. So that's the first baseline. The second baseline is knowledge of the laws.
Yeah.
And of course, the third is interpreting those laws accurately. And so I just want to give you a flavor. So most weekends, you get errors. Some hit the press and some don't, because they're technical errors not seen or brought to the fore by the media and to some degree the fans. So what we would do is, let's take the Arsenal dismissal that was wrong in law, because PGMOL said it was serious foul play.
Yeah.
It was not.
No.
And if you looked at the law, you know, that's what the first line of attack is. You go to law, and it wasn't serious foul play because there wasn't excessive force, and neither was there an element of brutality in that challenge. Yet the PGMOL came out defending Michael Oliver, saying that's serious foul play. And they said that to the likes of Sky and BBC. And I'm there saying, no way. That is not serious foul play.
No, it wasn't.
Halsey comes on the phone and says, have you seen what's going on? And I go, yeah. Keith, tell me, am I wrong? And I go, no, it's not a red card. Michael's got it wrong. And so has the VAR. I said, so what we used to do is take incidents like that. I'd have the referee across me, and I'd say to them, talk me through that incident. Let's analyse it. Let's look at it in the game and where you're at in the game. I had Prozone, so I could go to any part of the game very quickly with the video and with animation. And the outcome then was a discussion with the referee, but then the day after with all the referees, not to have an hanging of that referee, but to actually say, this is an incident that's taken place. What is your view? Now we're going to discuss it. But what we are going to do is come out of this room with a consensus of, if we're faced with that particular challenge again, this is the outcome. Are we all agreed? And so the part of it is setting down the very foundations of how you as a group, the elite group of referees in England, setting an example, not just in England, but across Europe. This is how we will interpret this law. That, for me, has clearly not been happening. And the biggest mistake that he made was, I had a small group of coaches, the likes of Roger Dillon, Paul Durkin, Gary Willard and others. These were guys who'd been good referees, but saw life in a different pattern. One was a plumber, one might have been an administrator, you know, and a mix. And they were the nucleus of ensuring that the messages that I was trying to get down, sometimes I might have been a bit harsh. They might soften that message, but the message would get through.
Yeah.
Coaches who were very skillful, very knowledgeable, very unselfish in how they approach things. And so what happened was, in the first few weeks of his employment, Mike Riley, because he saw them as Hackett men, got rid of them. And then in the tribunal, lost it by a million miles. I think he finished up, if I'm not mistaken, withdrawing from the event and having to pay out those guys. But for me, that was a catalyst of decline.
You actually said in our first chat, you think the worst decision that was made was putting Mike Riley as the head of the PGMOL. I thought that until they gave Howard Webb that job. And I was beside myself when I saw that he was getting that top job. I thought, this is not going to go well.